Camilla is currently living as a functional ghost inside her own home. She still holds the title, she still wears the crown, and she still stands beside her husband for the cameras. But behind the closed doors of Buckingham Palace, she has been entirely frozen out. No real authority, no private access to the king, and no say in the future of the monarchy. It didn't happen gradually, and it wasn't the result of some long public fallout. Literally overnight, her life changed. And honestly, the reason why is absolutely wild. It all comes down to a highly sensitive, confidential dossier compiled by Prince William and hand-delivered late at night. A physical document, pages long, that exposed a systematic, silent operation happening right under the king's nose. When Charles finished reading it, the decades of blind trust he had placed in his wife vanished. Here's how a secret investigation by the heir to the throne triggered the coldest internal removal in modern royal history. To really understand how this happened, you have to look at the exact moment the trap snapped shut. It didn't start with a big family argument or a dramatic confrontation. Instead, it started with a single physical object moving through the palace corridors in total silence. Around 9:30 at night, Buckingham Palace is usually winding down. King Charles had already dismissed most of his immediate staff for the evening, sitting completely alone in his private study. But then one of his most trusted personal aides walked into the room. In his hand was a thick manila envelope. It wasn't regular palace mail, and it hadn't gone through the usual administrative screening. It was secured by a distinct red wax seal belonging to Prince William. The aide explained that the Prince of Wales had given strict instructions. This was for the king's eyes only. It had to be delivered tonight, and it had to be delivered in private. Then the aide left, closing the door behind him. Imagine being in that room. Your eldest son, the heir to the throne, doesn't send a physically sealed dossier to your private study late at night for a casual chat. It was a massive breach of normal family and palace boundaries, and Charles knew it. Look, when the king actually broke that wax seal and started reading, he wasn't looking at a few pages of emotional complaints. It was a substantial, heavily detailed, multi-page report, and the entire thing focused on one specific subject, Camilla. Right from the opening paragraphs, William made the stakes incredibly clear. He wrote about the deep personal conflict he felt between family loyalty and his ultimate duty to the crown. But more importantly, he explicitly told his father that he wasn't asking him to take his word for any of this. The introduction stated that every single claim in the document could be independently verified through multiple separate sources. William knew his father's personality. He knew Charles would want to double-check everything. He was basically saying, look at the evidence yourself, and you'll see exactly what's been happening. And as Charles sat under his study lamp, turning page after page, he began to realize that a shadow operation had been running right under his nose. Small, weird palace incidents that he had shrugged off over the last few months suddenly started connecting into a terrifying pattern. The text notes that he got up at one point, walked over to the window, and just stared out into the dark palace grounds, his mind completely racing through recent memories. So what exactly did William put in that envelope that could shatter a king's trust in a single evening? The answer to that question comes down to a quiet, calculated restructuring of palace personnel. William's report didn't just guess at things. It laid out a highly specific timeline, and it started with an incident on a Tuesday in early September. On that exact day, a senior household manager with 20 years of flawless service suddenly did something completely unexpected. They requested a transfer to a minor administrative position. This wasn't a standard career move. This person had spent 2 decades coordinating daily schedules and managing operations right alongside Charles and Camilla. To the outside world, it looked like a routine retirement transition. But William found the sudden drop in responsibility incredibly strange, so he started making discreet inquiries. What he found was a pattern of intimidation. The report revealed that Camilla had called this veteran staff member into a private meeting. She used polite language, sure, but the message was unmistakable. She questioned their absolute loyalty, implying that people who couldn't adapt to her specific personal vision for the monarchy were going to find themselves in trouble. The household manager walked out of that room feeling so completely undermined and unsafe in their position that within days, they took a massive demotion just to get away from her. And honestly, that was just the beginning. The report documented two more long-serving palace employees who went through the exact same thing within weeks. These were people with decades of deep institutional knowledge, the very individuals who kept the complex machinery of royal protocol running smoothly every single day. All of them were systematically targeted, made to feel insecure about their jobs, and pushed into taking reduced roles. But it wasn't just about getting rid of old staff. It was about who came in next. Camilla didn't fill these highly sensitive vacancies through traditional palace recruitment channels. Instead, she brought in outsiders who lacked the usual extensive experience required for these roles. They had just one defining characteristic: absolute personal loyalty to Camilla rather than to the institution of the crown itself. It wasn't just a staffing change, it was a deliberate purge of the king's eyes and ears. So what did she do once her own people were firmly in place? Once those new people were in place, they immediately began forming a tight inner circle around the queen consort. They didn't operate like normal royal staff. Instead of serving the wider palace ecosystem, they began bypassing established protocols entirely, controlling access and taking over communications. William's report documented a regular series of meetings that Camilla held with this specific group, and the timing wasn't an accident. They were consistently scheduled in her private apartments during the exact blocks of time when Charles was occupied with official duties in an entirely different wing of the palace. During these secret sessions, attendees were actively encouraged to view themselves as part of an exclusive, modernizing force. They weren't just running an office, they were restructuring operations and quietly reassigning responsibilities behind the scenes. The result? The entire information flow within the palace completely shifted. Decisions that used to require deep consultation with senior advisors were suddenly being pushed through informal channels. If any of the remaining veteran staff raised a hand and asked about proper procedures, they were quietly excluded from future discussions. Look, a culture of total uncertainty started spreading through the offices. People became hesitant to do their actual jobs because they were terrified that following standard royal protocol might displease the queen consort. It wasn't just a change in office dynamics, it was a systematic dismantling of the institutional knowledge that had guided the crown for generations. Camilla was literally telling staff members that her position as queen consort carried far more weight than people realized. She repeatedly reminded people that because she stood right beside the king, her personal wishes deserved the exact same respect as direct orders from Charles himself. Think about how wild that actually is. If you have to explicitly order staff to treat your casual wishes as royal commands, you already know you are operating completely outside the rules. That isn't how institutional authority works. That is how a personal power grab works. And William had the receipts to prove it. The report detailed significant financial irregularities, showing that budget allocations for Camilla's office had shot up substantially without ever going through the standard approval channels. On top of that, trusted advisors were complaining that they could no longer get through to the king. Camilla had started intercepting their communications, reviewing the files first, and deciding what information Charles was actually allowed to see. She framed it as helpfully saving him from unnecessary details, but it was total control over the narrative. So how did a king react when he realized that his own wife had built a parallel government inside his palace? Charles didn't lash out, and he didn't confront Camilla right away. Instead, he chose a method of verification that was entirely silent and devastatingly thorough. The morning after receiving that 9:30 p.m. wax-sealed manila envelope, The king pulled out his personal diaries. Charles has kept meticulous journals for decades, logging not just official state business, but his raw daily observations of life inside the palace walls. He sat at his desk and began cross-referencing every single allegation in William's report against his own handwriting. He flipped back to that specific Tuesday in early September, the day the 20-year veteran household manager had abruptly broken and asked for a transfer. Charles scanned his own notes from that exact evening. Sure enough, he had written down that Camilla seemed strangely preoccupied and quiet. He kept digging. For every single event William documented, Charles looked at what he had recorded on those exact dates. And suddenly, dozens of tiny, isolated anomalies he had ignored over the last few months took on a terrifying new meaning. He found entries where he had noted feeling oddly out of touch with his own palace operations, days when he wrote that his staff seemed unusually hesitant to speak freely around him, occasions where Camilla had smoothly steered conversations away from specific topics or long-serving advisors. At the time, those moments felt too minor to worry about. Now, they were pieces of a puzzle that fit together perfectly. He recalled a specific morning in October when he had casually asked Camilla why that senior household manager had left. She had smiled and explained it away as a simple personal choice, just an old employee wanting less stress before retirement. Charles had believed her completely, trusting his wife's word without a second thought. Looking at his diary now, he realized the painful truth. He had never actually spoken to the manager himself. Camilla had intentionally made herself the sole source of information, blocking the king from verifying reality. He began examining his recent schedules with a cold, fresh perspective. He noticed a distinct pattern in when Camilla would suggest he attend certain meetings or completely skip others. She would volunteer to handle specific internal matters herself to lighten his workload, and he had genuinely appreciated it as a helpful partnership. Only now, looking at the dates, did he see the calculation behind it. It wasn't a partnership, it was a systematic effort to isolate him. The financial irregularities forced him to quietly pull the raw budget reports. He spent an entire afternoon locked away tracking the paper trail and found exactly what William had warned him about: increased spending from Camilla's office that deliberately bypassed every single approval protocol. He checked the security logs tracking movement through the palace, and the timestamps of Camilla's private apartment meetings matched William's timeline to the minute. Every single piece of evidence checked out. The king had to confront the most brutal realization of all. He had allowed this to happen because he had confused blind trust with healthy confidence. Camilla hadn't just misstepped, she had betrayed the king to build her own kingdom. So, how do you signal to your wife that her power is completely gone without saying a single word? The literal next morning, the illusion of their marriage was shattered over breakfast. When Charles walked into the dining room, Camilla was already there, sitting with her tea and the morning newspapers, just like any other day, but the routine was entirely dead. Usually the king would greet her with a kiss on the cheek. This time, just a brief, freezing nod. Instead of sitting in his usual chair right next to her, he walked all the way to the completely opposite end of the long table and sat down. Camilla looked up, visibly surprised by the distance, but Charles didn't look back. He immediately buried his face in his morning briefing papers, raw, unfiltered documents he was now reading with hypervigilance. She tried to spark some light conversation about the day's schedule, trying to gauge his mood, but he shut it down instantly. Minimal, one-word responses. He finished his food in total silence, stood up, and left the room without a single one of the leisurely, winding conversations that had anchored their mornings for decades. Camilla sat alone at that table, completely baffled. At first, she probably assumed he was just stressed out by some heavy matter of state. She had absolutely no clue that this silent breakfast was the official launch of a permanent, calculated freeze-out. Immediately after leaving the room, Charles instructed his private secretary to completely reorganize their schedules. From now on, separate transportation was required for every single upcoming royal engagement, No more shared cars. Palace staff found the sudden directive incredibly unusual, but they implemented it without question. Camilla actually discovered the new reality on her way out to an official event they were both attending. She walked down to the courtyard, only to be politely informed by security that the king's car had already departed, and her own vehicle wasn't scheduled to leave for another 15 minutes. It was an uncomfortable, deeply jarring moment, but she still couldn't see the full picture. Then came the evenings. The king abruptly stopped attending their regular nightly briefings, where they used to sit together and review the next day's operations. Instead, Charles started taking those updates completely alone in his private study, making major operational decisions without ever asking for her input. Palace staff noticed the shift within hours, and the bureaucratic machinery adapted instantly. Documents, requests, and memos that used to be addressed to both the king and the queen consort suddenly started routing exclusively through Charles's office. Camilla was being systematically stripped of the information flow that ran the palace. But a change in office paperwork wasn't going to be enough to fix this. Charles needed to completely dismantle the parallel structure she had built, and that meant changing the physical layout of the palace itself. Charles arranged for his personal belongings to be completely cleared out of the private apartments he shared with Camilla. In a matter of hours, he relocated his entire daily life to an entirely separate wing of the palace, quarters that had previously been reserved only for visiting guests. To the household staff, he framed the sudden move as a temporary, practical choice. He claimed he just needed a quiet, isolated space to focus on highly sensitive state matters that required his undivided attention. But everyone knew what it really meant. This physical separation ensured that their paths almost never crossed naturally during the day, even when they did have chance encounters in the long palace corridors. The warmth was completely gone. No affection, no familiar shorthand, just awkward, freezing exchanges of polite formalities. When Camilla realized the distance was becoming a permanent fixture, she tried to fight back using the only tools she had left. She attempted to schedule a private, intimate dinner away from the suffocating pressure of the palace staff so they could finally talk. She sent multiple formal requests through the proper channels, offering up a variety of dates that could easily fit into Charles's calendar. But every single attempt was met with the exact same wall. A polite typed note from his office citing unavoidable conflicts, late meetings, or prior commitments. She was trying to reach her husband, but she was being forced to deal with an automated administrative wall. It slowly became terrifyingly clear that the king wasn't just busy, he was actively, deliberately avoiding being left alone in a room with her. And look, the palace staff reads these signals faster than anyone. Servants and administrators who used to split their loyalty, checking in with both the king and queen consort before making moves, instantly pivoted. They saw the separate cars, the separate ings, and the rejected dinner requests. They realized that Camilla's opinions on household matters no longer carried a single ounce of weight in Charles's decision-making process. The most public blow, however, came when Charles entirely excluded her from the planning sessions for their upcoming high-profile royal tours. Historically, her perspective on public engagement strategy was something he valued deeply. Not anymore. Now, those closed-door strategy meetings were conducted exclusively with Prince William and other senior royals. Camilla didn't even get a seat at the outer edge of the table. Instead, she received basic, finalized schedules from a staff member, treated like a minor participant who was simply told where to stand and when to smile, rather than a partner who helped build the plan. What happens to a queen consort when she realizes her title is just an empty shell? The reality of her situation turned into a complete nightmare when the king started targeting her charitable initiatives. Charles didn't just sideline her behind closed doors. He began systematically removing her name from leadership positions on several major foundation boards they had co-chaired for years. Her responsibilities were quietly handed over to other family members without a single conversation or explanation. Camilla actually found out about her own demotions when revised organizational charts landed on her desk via official palace mail. The sheer public humiliation of it was devastating. By this point, Charles had stopped speaking to her entirely. Every single piece of communication was reduced to formal, typed memos delivered by his personal secretary. The notes were brief, dry, and stripped of even a hint of personal warmth. The king was treating his wife with the exact same cold, professional distance you'd show to a low-level government official. And then her social circle vanished. Mutual friends who used to clamor for private dinners or weekend gatherings suddenly became completely unavailable. Calendar conflicts, sudden travel, vague apologies, the excuses piled up. Camilla didn't realize that Charles had discreetly let it be known across their social circles that he preferred to keep his distance from her. The freeze-out had broken through the palace walls and seeped directly into her personal life. When she couldn't take the suffocating silence anymore, she tried to corner him at a small family gathering. She walked up, trying to force a moment of raw, private conversation. But Charles was entirely clinical. He expertly navigated the room, embedding himself in large groups and smoothly stepping away the second she walked in his direction. The snub was so obvious that other family members visibly noticed the tension, though nobody dared say a word. Frustrated and terrified, she sent a long, heartfelt letter to his quarters, begging for an explanation and asking what had gone wrong. 2 days later, a reply arrived. A single, typewritten paragraph from the king's office stating that all future communications regarding her schedule would be handled through the appropriate administrative channels. That was the exact moment genuine panic set in. Sitting alone in her apartments, Camilla had to face the most frightening truth of her royal life. She had absolutely no independent institutional power. The title, the jewelry, the status, it all existed solely on the lease of Charles's support. If he chose to pull that lease, she had no legal or structural fallback to fight back. She was entirely at his mercy, living like a prisoner in her own home. But while Camilla was being pushed into the shadows, someone else was being pulled directly into the light. The final piece of this administrative counterstrike didn't just focus on removing Camilla. It was about permanently filling the vacuum she left behind. While the Queen Consort was being pushed into total isolation, Prince William was being systematically elevated into a position of unprecedented authority. Palace observers began noticing the shift almost immediately. The Prince of Wales started joining high-level consultations and private state meetings that previous heirs to the throne had historically been excluded from. He wasn't just dropping by for family chats. He was actively sitting at the table, reviewing data and helping shape the daily governance of the monarchy. When Charles traveled for major engagements, William was right beside him. The palace began heavily prioritizing photographs and public appearances that emphasized this specific father-son partnership. The message to the public and to the remaining factions within the palace staff was crystal clear. This is where real power resides. William was no longer just a future king. He was now the present partner in running the entire institution. And what about the parallel network Camilla had spent months building? It dissolved in a matter of weeks. Charles didn't fire her hand-picked staff outright, which would have risked a messy public scandal. Instead, he used the bureaucracy to destroy them. Her inner circle found themselves quietly reassigned to meaningless, low-level, administrative tasks far away from any real centers of influence. Their responsibilities shrank until they were essentially holding empty make-work positions. The realization hit them fast. Association with Camilla no longer offered any career benefits, only extreme professional costs. Several of her recruits chose to resign rather than endure the humiliating demotions. while the ones who stayed understood they were permanently stuck at the bottom of the ladder. Look, throughout this entire process, Charles never gave Camilla a single opportunity to negotiate or defend herself. He never sat down to argue, and he never explained how much he knew. He simply changed the locks on the machinery of the state and left her on the outside. Camilla was forced to face a brutal choice: accept her new, entirely hollowed-out role in silence, or spark a massive public war that would destroy whatever was left of her reputation. Ultimately, Camilla chose the silence. She understood that the British public had only grudgingly accepted her after decades of intense, careful rehabilitation. Igniting a fresh, messy public war now would instantly undo all of it, leaving her legacy in absolute ruins. So today, she plays the part. She stands where she is told to stand, she smiles for the photographers, and she wears the crown at state dinners. But it is an entirely empty performance. When you strip away the titles and the history, this whole situation reveals the ultimate truth about how the modern monarchy works. It is a cold, clinical machine that values its own institutional survival above any personal relationship. In the end, Charles proved that a marriage is just a temporary arrangement, but the machinery of the crown is permanent. Camilla tried to build a personal empire inside the palace walls, but she forgot one simple rule: the house always wins.